All right. Hello, everybody. So today we're going to be talking about the reproductive system. My name is Larry Zaborski. Larry Stewart Zaborski. Today is February 9th, 2022, and this is a very dense chapter. So let's just get right into it. So before we start, there's just two terms that aren't explicitly mentioned in the chapter. Well, before you get right into the chapter, and the first one is pseudo hermaphroditism. That's basically when you grow up to have similar characteristics of a female up until age 12, until around the time when you hit puberty, and you start developing deeper voice and male genitalia, and that is pseudo hermaphroditism. And puberty, specifically, the definition of puberty is the period when a person becomes when goes from non-reproductive to reproductive. So let's jump right into it. Let's go into the sex determination. Couple of anatomy. Both male and female have the same three structures, which is first your gonads, and this is where your organs that this is the organs that produce your gametes, your eggs, and your sperm, respectively. Next, you have your internal genitalia. Your internal genitalia consists of the accessory ducts, accessory glands, and the ducts that connect with the gonads with the outside environment. And then you have your external genitalia, and that's just all of your external reproductive structures. So the next thing that goes into it, for men, you have testes that produce sperm, and for women, you have your ovaries that produce the eggs or the ova. Every human has 23 pairs of chromosomes. You have 22 actual analogous or similar pairs, which is your autosomes. And the last pair, your 23rd, is your sex chromosomes. That, as it sounds, determines your sex. Female are at double X or XX, and male are the XY. So, the absence of that Y is all that takes to for you to become a female. And in that time, you have what is called bipotential cells, and these cannot be determined to be male or female. In that time, your bipotential internal genitalia has accessory ducts, which are one of two. You have, well, you actually have both, but they develop into one of two. So you have your Wolffian and your Mullerian, and those are very important coming up right in a second. You have what is also called your SRY gene, which is your what determines your sex determination at the end of the day. I just basically called it a Y, but this is really what it goes into. So the presence of the SRY gene makes the bipotential gonads develop into testes, which makes you a male. The absence of the SRY gene makes the bipotential gonads go into the female line, and that develops into ovaries. So when you go down the male embryonic development stage, you have release what is called anti-Mullerian hormone, which is secreted by your testicular Sertoli cells, and they develop what is called, and that causes the Mullerian ducts to regress. Next, you have your interstitial Leydig cells, which secrete testosterone and dihydrotestosterone, and that is the dominant steroid hormone in males. So the absence of the testosterone and AMH caused the Mullerian ducts to develop into fallopian tubes or oviducts, the uterus, and the vagina. In females, the Wolffian ducts regress. So next, you have your basic patterns of reproduction. Biggest thing here is the gametogenesis. Gametogenesis is similar to both males and females. They both begin with the mitotic division, which respectively, you have your spermatogonium and your oogonia for males and females, respectively. The first step of meiosis causes the primary spermatocytes and primary oocytes. It creates those two, respectively. The first meiotic division secretes two identical secondary spermatocytes in males, or a large secondary oocyte egg, or an egg, and a tiny first polar body in females. The second meiotic division in males creates a haploid spermatid, which then matures into sperm, as we all know. So in females, it's a little bit separate. It's a little bit different. The second meiotic division does not go into completion until the egg is actually fertilized. So let's go into the hormones. So in both sexes, you have what is called the GnRH, which is your gonadotropin releasing hormone. So as it sounds like, it releases your gonadotropin, and that is secreted in your hypothalamus. What GnRH then secretes, it actually causes the secretion of FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone, LH, from your anterior pituitary. So FSH and your steroid sex hormone regulates your gametogenesis in the gonadal gamete producing cells. Your LH is much simpler, it just stimulates the production of your steroid sex hormones. Simple, quote unquote, but simpler than what FSH does. So the next you have your steroid sex hormones. In males, it's just going to be your androgens, your estrogen, progesterone, and progesterone. So you have another hormone called aromatase, and that is what converts your androgens, which is your testosterone, your dihydrotestosterone, into estrogen. You have also what is called inhibin, just what it sounds like. Inhibin inhibits the secretion of FSH. Activin, what it sounds like, activates. It actually stimulates FSH secretion. Your gonadosteroids generally suppress the secretion of GnRH, FSH, and LH. However, if estrogen is rapidly above a threshold level for at least a certain amount of time, the feedback changes to positive and stimulates the gonadotropin release. After puberty, your GnRH releases in small pulses, which is regulated by a region in the hypothalamus called the pulse generator. So we're going to go into male reproduction now. So the male reproduction components are the testes, your internal genitalia, which includes your accessory glands and your ducts. Your external genitalia would be your penis and your scrotum. So the testes consist of a bunch of seminiferous tubules and interstitial tissue that contains blood vessels and these Leydig cells that secrete the testosterone. Your seminiferous tubules join the epididymis, which then becomes what is called the vas deferens. The vas deferens empties into your urethra. These seminiferous tubules also contain spermatogonia, spermatocytes, and your Sertoli cells. These tight junctions between the Sertoli cells is what forms your blood testes barrier. The spermatogonia within these seminiferous tubules undergo meiosis, becoming primary spermatocytes, spermatids, and finally sperm. I think it's on average between about 2 months, about 60 days. Sperm reach maturity in the epididymis. Your Sertoli cells are what regulate your sperm development. They also produce inhibin, activin, growth factors, enzymes, and the androgen binding protein. The interstitial cells produce about 95% of the male testosterone. The other 5% comes from your adrenal cortex. Your FSH stimulates the Sertoli cells production, and also the androgen binding protein, the inhibin, and the paracrine molecules. Interstitial cells also produce testosterone at the discretion of LH, like we learned earlier. So what you're going to have next is going to be your semen. What makes up your semen is mostly the prostate gland that makes up, your prostate gland makes about 20% of it. The seminal-vesicles are the ones that make up most of your semen, and your bulbourethral glands, which give a little bit of its components, consistency. So you have your primary and your secondary sex characteristics within a male. Your primary are going to be your sex organs and your external genitalia, and your secondary sexual characteristics are other features of the body, such as body shape. Next, we're going to go into the female reproduction. And female reproduction is going to be slightly more complicated than a male. Let's start off with the anatomy. You have your external genitalia, which is another name for it is your vulva or the pudendum. You have within that your labia majora, labia minora, and the clitoris. The urethra opening lies between the clitoris and the vagina. You have your uterine tissue layers. You have your outer connective tissue, your myometrium, and your endometrium. Within that, you also have your fallopian tubes, and they are lined with ciliated epithelium. And the bulk of an ovary consists of the ovarian follicles. So next we're going to go into your menstrual cycles, and this is when your mostly of your this is when your eggs are actually produced, and there's a lot of hormonal control, primarily from your GnRH, from the hypothalamus, the FSH, and the LH, and the estrogen, progesterone, inhibin, and AMH are all coming from your ovaries. Next is you're gonna have your ovarian cycle. The first part of it is the follicular phase, which is a period of follicular growth. Next, you're gonna have your ovulation, which is the release of the egg from its follicle, and the last phase is the luteal phase, and this is the when the ruptured follicle becomes what is called a corpus luteum. Next, you have your uterine cycle, and this is something called the menses begin the uterine cycle, and this is followed by a proliferative phase with endometrial thickening, and following that, following the ovulation phase, you're gonna have when your endometrium goes into a secretory phase. You're gonna have a specific type of cells like your follicular granulosa cells. These are what secrete your estrogen. As the follicular phase ends, there's a surge of luteinizing hormone, or LH, and it's necessary for the oocyte maturation, and that's what's going to give off our eggs. The corpus luteum, which I mentioned earlier, that is what secretes your progesterone and very little estrogen, and that is what exerts the negative feedback in the hypothalamus anterior pituitary feedback loop. And your estrogen and your androgen control your primary and secondary sex characteristics within the females. Next, you're going to have is your procreation. Procreation involves the human sex act, or coitus, as you may call it. Within that, there's 4 phases. There's your excitement, your plateau, your orgasm, and your resolution. In males, we have something called the erection reflex, and this is a spinal reflex that can be influenced by higher brain centers. It's a parasympathetic input mediated by nitric oxide, which actively vasodilates the penile arterioles, and that's what gives us the erection reflex. Some terms that you should know. One is emission, and that is the movement of sperm out of the vas deferens and into the urethra, and ejaculation, which is the expulsion of semen to the external environment. You have something called contraception, and that is the prevention, to the best of your ability, from becoming, as a male, you're preventing your female partner from getting pregnant, and same thing as the female, you would prevent yourself from getting pregnant. Contraception includes abstinence, which is abstaining from sex, the barrier methods, condoms and such, implementation prevention. There's a few options in that sense, and you have hormonal treatments. Last thing within this procreation, you have infertility. And infertility can arise from a problem in the male, female, or both. And this is something where we have a medical treatment in such as in vitro fertilization, which allows couples to have children. The next step we have, which we just talked about preventing it, we have in case it happens or if you're trying to, pregnancy and parturition. So within the stage, the sperm must go through capacitation before they can fertilize an egg. And capacitation is the final maturation step for the sperm that is deposited in the female reproductive tract. Fertilization normally takes place in the fallopian tubes. Capacitated sperm releases acrosomal enzymes, or acrosome, like we discussed earlier, and that is the acrosomal reaction. The first sperm to reach the egg fertilizes it. Fusion of the egg and the sperm initiates what is called a cortical reaction, and that prevents polyspermy. Polyspermy is when more than one sperm tries to fertilize an egg, and that cortical reaction is what prevents it. Developing embryo is a hollow blastocyst when it reaches the uterus, and once the blastocyst implants, it develops into an extra embryonic membrane. There's something called chorionic villi of the placenta, and it is surrounded by pools of maternal blood where nutrients, gases, water, all of it's exchanged between the mother and the embryo. There's a few hormones which we need to know. One is the human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG, and that is produced by the embryo, and remains active during early pregnancy. And that's how the corpus luteum remains active during pregnancy. The placenta actually also secretes HCG. It secretes estrogen, progesterone, and the human placental lactogen. And this hormone is what plays a role in maternal metabolism. So you have other hormones like progesterone, and progesterone is essential for maintaining the endometrium, and along with relaxin, which is another hormone, it helps suppress the uterine contractions. You have estrogen during pregnancy, contributes to the developing of milk secreting ducts in the breasts, and once you get to the later stages of pregnancy, you have what is called parturition. And this normally occurs between the 38th and the 40th week of gestation. It begins with labor and ends with the delivery of the fetus and the placenta. Hopefully, it comes out healthy. Positive feedback loop of oxytocin secretion causes the uterine muscle contraction within the mother. And following delivery, the mammary glands actually produce milk under the influence of prolactin. And the milk is released during nursing by oxytocin, causing the mammary gland myoepithelial cells to finally contract. And the last step in the reproductive system, you have your growth and aging. And there's really two big terms that you really need to know. In girls, puberty begins with the menarche, which is your first menstrual period. Typically happens between the ages of around 8 and 13. And for boys, the age range for puberty is between about 9 and 14. Now this is an average. It could always go a little bit further and a little bit earlier and a little bit past. It doesn't happen often, but it does actually happen. And the next one is menopause. The menopause is, like we spoke about earlier, this is the cessation of reproductive cycle in women. Now with men, with increasing age, some men exhibit symptoms of testosterone deficiency, or sperm that becomes infertile. And this is perfectly normal, but the men's reproductive cycle still kind of works. But for women, once they undergo menopause, it kind of stops. I hope you guys enjoyed. That was a very dense and packed chapter, but I hope you guys got a lot of information in, and hope to see you in the next one.